The hand-painted teacup slipped from Amara's fingers, porcelain fragments scattering across the Persian rug. Through the gap in the mahogany doors, she watched her future dissolve in real time. Pedro sat across from Mr. Huang, a steel-eyed investor with the kind of smile that closed billion-dollar deals. Between them lay a contract, and beside it, a photograph of a woman Amara had never seen. "The terms are straightforward, Mr. Kenner," Huang said, his voice clinical. $60 million for your family's textile empire. In exchange, you marry my daughter Sujin, someone with the proper credentials for your position. Amara held her breath, waiting for Pedro to laugh, to refuse, to remember the 4 years they'd spent building a life together. But his hand never trembled. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask for time, didn't even glance at their engagement photo on the mantel behind him. He signed the contract immediately. One signature. That's all it took to erase everything they'd promised each other. Amara stumbled backward, her chest collapsing like those porcelain shards. She had to leave, now, before they discovered her, before she shattered completely in front of these people who'd never valued her. But as she turned to flee, she collided with a wall of muscle and expensive cologne. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. She looked up into the face of a man she'd never seen at any Kenner family gathering. Older, devastatingly handsome, with silver threading through jet-black hair and eyes like polished obsidian that seemed to catalog every broken piece of her. "Leaving so soon, Miss Baptiste?" His voice was smooth, accented, laced with something dangerous. "I'm Jiho, Pedro's uncle." He glanced at the door she'd been watching through, then back at her tear-streaked face. A slight smile touched his lips, cold, calculating, predatory. "It appears we both have reasons to make the Kenners regret their choices. I have a proposition for you." What Amara didn't know was that Jiho wasn't just Pedro's estranged uncle. He was the man who could give her everything she'd ever wanted and destroy everything she'd ever believed in. And worse, he was the most dangerous man in 3 countries. Before we see what Amara does next, don't forget to like this video. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the exciting stories we release daily. Hit that notification bell, because this story is about to get wild. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's get into Amara's story. Amara Baptiste had always believed in intuition. When she found the designer lipstick in Pedro's car 6 months ago, a shade she'd never wear, too light for her skin tone, she'd convinced herself it belonged to his sister. When his late-night, emergency board meetings became more frequent, she'd trusted him. When his mother started making pointed comments about cultural compatibility at family dinners, she'd smiled through gritted teeth and held her head high. But there were no excuses for what she was witnessing now. The Kenner estate was hosting what Pedro had called a casual investor cocktail. He'd asked Amara to arrive early, help arrange the catering, play the perfect future daughter-in-law. She'd shown up in her best dress, crimson red, to match the ruby pendant he'd given her last Christmas, only to realize she'd left her portfolio in the car. That forgotten portfolio had saved her from a lifetime of lies. When she'd returned through the garden entrance, she'd heard voices drifting from the study. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to see inside, just enough to hear everything. "You understand this is business, Mr. Kenner." The man's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "Mr. Huang, CEO of Huang Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in East Asia. My investment comes with conditions. Non-negotiable conditions." "I understand, Mr. Huang." Pedro's voice, the same voice that had whispered forever just that morning, sounded hollow, rehearsed. His father, Theodore Kenner, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The Baptiste girl is beautiful, I'll grant you that. Talented too. but beauty and talent don't secure generational wealth, son. Huang's daughter Sujin has a doctorate from Oxford and distribution networks across Southeast Asia. This marriage alliance will elevate our family beyond anything your grandfather built. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Marriage alliance. What about Amara? Pedro asked, but there was no conviction in his voice. Just the faint echo of obligation. Huang laughed, cold, dismissive, final. What about her? Compensate her generously. Apologize with sincerity. Move forward. Women of her background are adaptable. She'll find another opportunity. You're doing her a favor, really. She would have never truly belonged in our world anyway. Women of her background. The word seared through Amara's chest like a brand. She knew exactly what Huang meant. It didn't matter that Amara had a master's degree in fashion design from Parsons. Didn't matter that she'd built Baptiste Couture from a single sewing machine in her grandmother's basement into a seven-figure business. Didn't matter that half the Kenner family strategies Pedro took credit for had been her ideas, whispered over pillow talk and sketched on napkins during late-night planning sessions. What mattered was that she was black. That her last name didn't appear in their social registers. That she wasn't part of their meticulously curated vision of dynasty, legacy, and old money respectability. Sign here, Mr. Kenner. Huang slid papers across the mahogany desk. Terminate the engagement officially and the $60 million transfers to Kenner Textiles today. You'll announce your engagement to Sujin at the spring gala. Clean, simple, profitable. Amara waited for Pedro to stand up. To tell them all to go to hell. To choose love over a wire transfer. He picked up the pen. The world tilted sideways. For years. She'd given him 4 years of her life. She'd turned down a design residency in Milan to stay with him. She'd endured his mother's microaggressions, his father's condescending compliments, his friends' surprised reactions that he was dating someone like her. She'd loved him with every fragment of her heart. And he was trading her for an investment like she was a depreciating asset. As Pedro's signature dried on the page, Amara felt something inside her crystallize. Not break. Breaking implied something fragile, something weak. No, this was a transformation. From soft to sharp. From trusting to tactical. She grabbed the antique teacup she'd been holding and hurled it against the hallway floor. The crash brought instant silence from the study. Then footsteps. Pedro appeared first, his face draining of color. Amara, I thought, when did I get here? She smiled, and it was all teeth. Early enough. Huang emerged behind him, looking more irritated than concerned. Theodore followed, his expression calculating, already assessing damage control. Amara, let me explain. Pedro started, his hands raised like she was a spooked animal. Explain what? That you just auctioned me off for $60 million? That our entire relationship was apparently worth less than a quarterly earnings report. Her voice was steady, glacial. No explanation necessary. I heard everything. You're upset. Huang's tone was patronizing, oily. Understandably so. But you're a businesswoman yourself, Miss Baptiste. Surely you see that this arrangement is optimal for all parties. I'm prepared to offer you fair compensation for your time invested. Compensation. Amara laughed, bitter, sharp, dangerous. You want to pay me like I'm a contractor you're terminating? How generous. That's not what he meant, Theodore interjected, stepping forward. But be realistic, Miss Baptiste. You and Pedro come from fundamentally different worlds. This outcome was inevitable. Different worlds, Amara repeated slowly. You mean because you lack the strategic connections our family requires. Theodore cut her off smoothly. Don't make this about race. It's about business infrastructure. Surely you understand infrastructure, given your boutique design operation. Boutique operation. The company that had been featured in Vogue. The company that dressed celebrities and designed for New York Fashion Week. The company she'd built with her own hands while Pedro had inherited every advantage he'd ever had. Amara, please. Pedro finally found his voice, stepping closer. I do care about you. But this is about my family's survival. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. She pulled the ruby pendant from her neck, the delicate chain snapping easily. 3 carats.
Custom designed.
A pretty cage disguised as a gift. She threw it at his feet. I understand that you're a coward. That your love had terms and conditions. That I wasted 4 years on a man with no backbone. She turned to leave, her heels clicking against marble. You'll regret this, Huang called after her, his voice sharp with threat. You have no conception of who you're dealing with, Miss Baptiste. I can ensure you never show at a major fashion week again. I can make you invisible in this industry. Amara paused, looked back over her shoulder, and smiled like broken glass. Try it. Unlike your future son-in-law, I built my empire myself. I don't need family money or inherited connections. I have something you people have never had to develop, actual talent. She walked out with her head high, but her hands were trembling. The November night was bitter, cutting through her dress like a blade. She'd parked 4 blocks away, and now she regretted the stilettos, the dress, every choice that had led her to this moment. Miss Baptiste. The voice came from the shadows near the estate's garden gate. Deep, accented, unfamiliar. Amara spun, her keys positioned between her fingers as a weapon. Who's there? A man stepped into the light from the iron lanterns, and Amara's breath caught for an entirely different reason. He was older, late 40s, perhaps early 50s, but age had only refined him into something devastating. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver streaking through perfectly styled black hair. His face was all sharp angles and smooth planes, distinctly Korean features that seemed carved from marble and shadow simultaneously. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her car, and moved with a kind of lethal grace that spoke of either extensive combat training or a lifetime of dangerous work. Possibly both. Forgive me for startling you, he said, his English flawless but carrying a subtle Korean accent that made every word sound deliberate, weighted. My name is Jiho, though I believe you know my nephew. Amara lowered her keys slightly, but didn't relax. I didn't know Pedro had an uncle. He doesn't know about me, that is. A slight smile touched his lips, sardonic, knowing, lethal. His father and I have been estranged for 20 years. I only recently returned to the States. And you just happened to be lurking in the garden during their investor meeting? I don't lurk, Miss Baptiste. I observe. He moved closer, and she caught his scent, something expensive and clean. Oud and black pepper. I arrived hoping to speak with my brother. Instead, I witnessed quite the fascinating negotiation. And your rather magnificent exit. Were you spying on them? On them? No. His eyes, dark, intense, impossibly focused, met hers. I was watching you. Warning bells should have rung. A strange man, watching her, appearing from nowhere. But there was something in his gaze that wasn't predatory. It was assessing, like he was examining a diamond and calculating its true worth. That's disturbing, she said, but didn't move away. It's honest. Disturbing would be pretending this was coincidence. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You have fire in you. I watched you discover your world was ending, and you didn't cry, didn't beg. You shattered and reformed into something sharper in the space of minutes. That's extraordinary. What do you want, Mr. Jiho? Just Jiho, please. He reached into his jacket and Amara tensed, but he only produced a business card. Heavy black cardstock, embossed with silver characters. I want to offer you an opportunity. I'm not interested in whatever. Revenge, he said simply. I'm offering you revenge. And a way to take everything from the people who just tried to discard you like yesterday's trend. Now she was listening. He continued, his voice low, hypnotic. My nephew just traded you for $60 million and a connected bride. Imagine his face when you walk back into his world, not as the discarded fiancé, but as something untouchable. Someone with more power than his father ever dreamed of possessing. And how would I do that? His smile widened, and for the first time, Amara saw something dangerous in it. Something that made her pulse quicken and her skin flush. Marry me instead. Amara stared at him. You're insane. Possibly. Ji-ho agreed pleasantly. But I'm also very serious. Hear me out before you refuse. I don't even know you. You didn't know my nephew was willing to sell you out until an hour ago. At least I'm being transparent about my intentions from the start. He gestured toward a stone bench near the garden fountain. 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes to explain, and if you're not interested, I'll disappear and you'll never see me again. Amara looked at the card in her hand, then at the man who'd appeared from nowhere with an impossible offer. She should walk away. Should get in her car and never look back. But something in his eyes, something dark and knowing and absolutely certain, made her hesitate. 5 minutes, she said finally. And then I'm leaving. Ji-ho's smile was slow, satisfied, dangerous. 5 minutes is all I need. Amara sat on the stone bench, as far from Ji-ho as the space allowed, her body coiled tight as a spring. The garden was unseasonably warm for November, but she felt cold down to her bones. Behind them, the Kenner estate glowed like a gilded prison, every window a reminder of the life she'd almost trapped herself in. Ji-ho didn't sit. He stood beside the fountain, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a silver cigarette case he'd produced from inside his jacket. He offered it to her first, a gesture so old-world it felt like something from a film noir. She shook her head. He lit one for himself, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating the sharp planes of his face. When he exhaled, smoke curled between them like a question mark. I've been watching you for 2 years, Miss Baptiste, he said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of running water. Not stalking. Observing. There's a difference. That's exactly what a stalker would say. His lips twitched. Fair enough. Let me clarify. I've been watching your work. Your career trajectory. The way you've built Baptiste Couture from nothing into something that makes old money uncomfortable. He took another drag. Do you know why old money hates new money, Miss Baptiste? Enlighten me. Because new money reminds them that wealth can be earned. That their empires aren't divine right, just inherited luck. He turned to look at her fully. You scare people like my brother. Like the Huangs. Because you didn't ask permission to succeed. You just did it. Amara's throat tightened. You're very good at reading people. I'm good at reading you. He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I know you turned down the lawn for Pedro. I know you've been ghostwriting his business proposals for 3 years. I know you're the one who suggested the sustainable textile pivot that saved Kenner Industries from bankruptcy. Her breath caught. How could you possibly? Because I make it my business to know everything about people who interest me. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, and suddenly the power dynamic shifted. He wasn't looming. He was offering her equality. And you, Amara Baptiste, have interested me for a very long time. The way he said her name, precise, deliberate, like he was tasting it, sent electricity down her spine. Why? She whispered. Because you're brilliant. Because you're dangerous and don't know it yet. Because watching you dim yourself for my worthless nephew has been like watching someone cage a dragon and call it a pet. He crushed his cigarette under his shoe. I want to see what happens when you stop caging yourself. And marrying you would accomplish that. How, exactly? Jiho's smile was all predator now. Because I don't need you to be smaller, Miss Baptiste. I need you to be exactly as big as you are. Bigger, even. He pulled out his phone, pulled up a photo, and handed it to her. This is what I'm offering. Amara looked at the screen, and her heart stopped. It was a building. Glass and steel, 10 stories, in Manhattan's Garment District. That's the old Rousseau and Black headquarters, she breathed. The luxury textile manufacturer that had gone bankrupt last year. Prime real estate. Legendary infrastructure. It's yours, Jiho said simply. The moment you say yes. Full ownership. No strings beyond our arrangement. You want to destroy Pedro's world? Start by building an empire so large his family looks like a lemonade stand in comparison. Amara stared at him, her pulse thundering in her ears. What's the catch? You marry me. You let me introduce you to the right people. You stop apologizing for taking up space. His eyes locked onto hers. And you trust that I'm not Pedro. I don't break my promises. The garden fell silent except for the fountain. Amara looked at the building on his phone, then at the estate behind them, then at the man who'd appeared from nowhere offering her everything she'd ever wanted wrapped in a devil's bargain. I'll need it in writing, she said quietly. Jiho's smile could have cut glass. I wouldn't have it any other way. Amara's grandmother used to say that fabric had memory, that every stitch held a story, every thread remembered the hands that shaped it. At 7 years old, sitting at the worn kitchen table in Port of Spain, Amara hadn't understood. She'd just wanted to make the dress she'd drawn, a wild explosion of color and asymmetric lines that her grandmother laughed at and called too bold for this world. Then I'll make a bolder world, Grandmere, Amara had declared. Her grandmother had smiled, threaded her needle, and taught her the first stitch. 20 years later, Amara had made good on that promise. She'd clawed her way from that kitchen to Parsons on a full scholarship, survived on ramen and spite while her classmates summered in the Hamptons, and launched Baptiste Couture with 3 pieces and a dream. Her aesthetic was unapologetic, vibrant Caribbean prints colliding with architectural minimalism, tradition weaponized into innovation. Critics called her refreshing. Buyers called her the future. She'd been untouchable, unstoppable, herself. Then she met Pedro Kenner at a gallery opening in Soho. He'd been standing in front of one of her early sketches, a gown made of deconstructed Kent cloth and silk organza, looking genuinely captivated. Not the performative interest she'd seen from other collectors, but real fascination. This shouldn't work, he'd said when she approached. But it's extraordinary. She should have heard the warning in those words. Shouldn't work. As if her vision required his permission to exist. But he'd smiled at her like she was a mystery worth solving, and she'd been young enough, lonely enough, to mistake attention for acceptance. The first year was intoxication. Pedro introduced her to galleries, investors, people who could elevate her brand. He took her to family dinners where his mother served wine that cost more than Amara's first month's rent. He made her feel like she belonged in rooms she'd only ever seen in magazines. The second year, the suggestion started. Maybe tone down the prints for this collection. You want to appeal to a broader audience. That neckline might be too daring for the Met benefit. Do you really want to be known as a Caribbean designer? Why not just designer? Each suggestion was reasonable, professional, loving even. Each suggestion carved away a piece of her until she barely recognized her own work. By year 3, Baptiste Couture was successful, polished, and utterly safe. Her grandmother would have hated it. Amara was starting to hate it too, but she told herself it was growth, maturity, compromise. The things you did when you loved someone. Pedro proposed on a yacht in the Hudson, surrounded by his friends, with a ring he'd chosen without asking her preferences. Everyone applauded. Amara said yes because she'd already said yes to everything else. What was one more surrender? Year 4, she'd stopped sketching altogether. Why bother? Pedro would just suggest modifications until her vision became his, and she was too tired to fight. That's what she'd been thinking about when she arrived at the Kenner estate tonight. How tired she was. How small she'd become. How the girl who'd once promised her grandmother she'd make a bolder world had instead made herself smaller to fit inside someone else's. Standing in that garden with Jiho's offer burning in her hand, Amara realized something devastating. Pedro hadn't stolen her fire. She'd handed it to him, piece by piece, stitch by stitch, until nothing remained but the memory of who she'd been. No more, she whispered to the night air. Jiho, who'd been waiting silently while she processed, tilted his head. No more what? Amara looked up at him, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt like herself. No more compromises. No more making myself smaller. No more apologies for taking up space. She stood, meeting his eyes with steel in her own. If I do this, if I marry you, I do it as myself. The version of me that terrifies people like your brother. The one that doesn't ask permission. Jiho's smile was slow, dangerous, approving. That's the only version I want. Jiho walked to the fountain's edge and sat, patting the stone beside him. This time, Amara didn't hesitate. She sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the November chill. You want to know what I really do, he said. It wasn't a question. I assume you're not in textiles.
No.
He laughed, low and dark. I run a shipping empire. Legitimate on paper. Luxury goods, rare textiles, private acquisitions for collectors who don't ask questions. We move things that need to move quietly across borders. Art, wine, fabric. He paused. Sometimes other commodities. You're telling me you're a smuggler. I'm telling you I'm a businessman who understands that the world runs on what people pretend doesn't exist. He turned to face her fully. In Korea, they call me Yugryong, the ghost. Because I move through systems without leaving traces. I have contacts in Seoul, Tokyo, Paris, Milan, New York. People who owe me favors. People who fear disappointing me. Amara's pulse quickened, but not from fear. From possibility. And you're offering me access to this network. I'm offering you an empire. His voice dropped lower, intimate and dangerous. Marry me, and within 6 months, Baptiste Couture will have access to fabric mills in Como that don't take new clients. Ateliers in Paris that have 50-year waiting lists. Buyers in markets the Huangs can't touch because they're too legitimate, too careful, too bound by rules. He leaned closer. I play by different rules, Amara. And I'm offering to teach you the game. Why? She searched his face for deception and found only intensity. You don't know me. Why would you give me this? Because my brother stole something from me 20 years ago, and I want him to watch as I build something so magnificent it makes his entire legacy look like a footnote. Jiho's smile was all edges now. Because the Kenners have always believed blood equals power, and I want to prove that chosen family destroys bloodlines. Because, he reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness, I've watched you create beauty from nothing, and I want to see what you build when you have everything. Amara's breath caught at his touch. What do you get out of this arrangement? Revenge. Legitimacy. A wife who makes everyone who ever underestimated me realize they made a fatal mistake. His hand dropped, but his eyes didn't leave hers.
And honestly,
Your company. I've been alone for 2 decades, Amara. I'm tired of it. The vulnerability in that admission cracked something open in her chest. You said you had a condition. One condition. He held up a single finger. Complete honesty between us. No games, no lies, no pretending. You want to know something about my business? I'll tell you. I want to know something about your work? You'll share it. We're partners in this, or we're nothing. Partners, she repeated slowly. Equals. He extended his hand, formal and binding. I don't want a trophy wife, Miss Baptiste. I want a co-conspirator. Someone who'll help me burn down the kingdoms that tried to keep us out. Amara looked at his hand, looked at the Kenner estate glowing behind them, looked at the business card with the building's address still clutched in her other hand. She thought about her grandmother saying fabric had memory, about 4 years of making herself smaller, about Pedro's signature on a contract that erased her like she'd never mattered. She thought about fire. How soon can we sign the papers? She asked. Jiho's answering smile was pure triumph. I have my lawyer on speed dial. Amara spent the next 3 days doing what any rational woman would do before marrying a man she'd known for 5 minutes. She hired a private investigator. The report arrived in a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 10 pounds. She opened it in her studio at 2 in the morning, surrounded by half-finished sketches she couldn't focus on, with cold coffee and growing dread as company. The first page was a photograph. Jiho at maybe 25, standing beside an older man who had the same sharp features, clearly his father. Both wore traditional hanbok for what looked like a formal ceremony. Jiho's expression was unreadable, carved from stone. The caption read, Last known photograph with family, 2005. Seoul, South Korea. Amara flipped the page. The investigator had been thorough. Jiho, born Park Jiho, changed his surname after the estrangement, had been groomed to take over his family's legitimate shipping conglomerate. Brilliant, Harvard-educated, fluent in 5 languages. Then, 20 years ago, something happened. The report was vague on details, citing family dispute over business ethics and alleged betrayal by younger brother. That younger brother was Theodore Kenner, who'd married into the Kenner family and abandoned his Korean name entirely. After the split, Jiho disappeared from Seoul society. When he resurfaced 5 years later, he was Yugryong, the ghost. No longer working within legal frameworks but around them, through them, above them. He'd built a shadow empire that made his family's legitimate business look quaint. The investigator had compiled rumors, whispers, unconfirmed reports. Jiho controlled shipping routes throughout East Asia. He moved luxury goods that couldn't be traced, vintage wines, rare textiles, art of questionable provenance. There were whispers of underground gambling houses in Macau and Seoul, exclusive clubs where billionaires played with money that didn't officially exist. Nothing concrete enough for law enforcement, but everyone in those circles knew if you needed something moved quietly, you called Yugryong. There was a quote from an unnamed source in Hong Kong. He's not violent. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't threaten. He simply makes it clear that disappointing him would be the worst decision of your life. And somehow, people believe him. Amara turned another page and found the betrayal. 20 years ago, Jiho had secured a massive contract with a European luxury conglomerate, negotiations that took 3 years and would have tripled the family business. Theodore, younger and ambitious, had approached the same conglomerate separately, offering to undercut his brother's deal if they'd back his independence from the family. The Europeans chose Theodore. He took the contract, the connections, and half the family's client list. Then he married Constance Kenner, absorbed into American old money, and erased his past entirely. Their father had sided with Theodore, called Jiho's anger ungrateful and his response dishonorable. Jiho had walked away from everything, his surname, his inheritance, his family name, and built something greater out of pure spite and brilliant strategy. Amara sat back, the papers scattered across her desk. She understood him now. The precision of his revenge. The calculated patience. Theodore hadn't just stolen a contract. He'd stolen Jiho's entire future, his family's respect, his place in the world. And now Jiho was offering Amara the same thing he'd done for himself, the chance to build an empire from betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Have you finished investigating me yet, or should I send my own dossier to save you time? Despite everything, Amara smiled. She typed back, your brother's a coward who steals what better men build. 3 dots appeared, then, past tense, was a coward. By the time we're done, he'll be nothing at all. Amara looked at the photographs, the reports, the evidence of a man who'd turned destruction into resurrection. She texted, when do we start? The response was immediate. We already have. Pedro appeared at her studio door 6 days after the garden, and Amara knew immediately something had gone catastrophically wrong with his pristine plan. He looked destroyed. His Brooks Brothers shirt was wrinkled, top buttons undone, no tie. His hair, always meticulously styled, stuck up in places like he'd been running his hands through it. And he reeked of whiskey, expensive and desperate. Amara. Her name came out broken.
Please. I need to talk to you.
She'd been draping silk on a dress form, working on a design that had finally come back to her after 4 years of silence. Bold, asymmetric, unapologetically vibrant. The kind of piece her grandmother would have loved. She didn't stop working. The studios closed, Pedro. It fell apart. He stumbled inside anyway, ignoring her lack of invitation. The whole thing. Sujin found out about my history, about the others before you. She called me a liability and backed out. Her father pulled the entire investment. Amara carefully pinned the silk, her hands steady even as satisfaction bloomed in her chest. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. He laughed, bitter and sharp. You're glad. But Amara, this means, don't you see? This means we can fix this. We can go back to how things were. She finally turned to face him, and something in her expression made him step back. Go back. Her voice was quiet, lethal.
To what exactly?
To me making myself smaller, so you could feel bigger? To you stealing my ideas and calling them collaboration? To your mother's comments about how exotic I looked at family dinners? That's not fair. You signed a contract that erased me for $60 million. She moved closer, and he retreated until his back hit the wall. You called me a situation to handle. You traded 4 years of my life, like I was a stock you were liquidating. So tell me, Pedro, what exactly should we go back to? I made a mistake. Tears tracked down his face, pathetic and too late. I panicked. My father, the pressure, the business. Everyone has pressure. Not everyone sells the person they claim to love. Amara crossed her arms. You want to know the difference between you and me? When I build something, I build it myself. When you inherit something, you destroy it, including us. I still love you.
No.
You love the version of me that said yes to everything. The one who dimmed her light, so you could shine brighter. That woman doesn't exist anymore. She smiled, and it was all sharp edges. You killed her when you picked up that pen. Pedro slid down the wall until he was sitting on her studio floor, broken and drunk and finally understanding. Is there someone else? His voice cracked on the question. Amara thought about Jiho's text, about the building waiting for her, about a partnership built on honesty instead of erosion. Yes, she said simply. His head snapped up. Already? It's been less than a week. It's been less than a week since you showed me who you really are. But I've been alone in our relationship for much longer than that. She walked to the door and opened it. Go home, Pedro. Sober up. Sign whatever papers your father tells you to sign. And stay away from me. You'll regret this. He struggled to his feet, anger finally cutting through the self-pity. When you realize what you gave up. I gave up nothing. Amara's voice could have frozen hell. I escaped. There's a difference. She watched him stumble out into the night, then locked the door behind him. Her phone buzzed immediately. Jiho, I have security footage of your studio entrance. Say the word, and he never comes near you again. She stared at the text, something warm and dangerous unfurling in her chest. He'd been watching, protecting her without being asked. She typed back, he's already gone. But thank you for caring enough to watch. His response came quickly. I always watch the things I value. See you tomorrow for the contract signing? Amara looked at her design, half-finished and bold, and finally hers again. Wouldn't miss it, she wrote. Then she went back to creating something beautiful. Jiho's penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Tribeca that didn't advertise its existence. No doorman, just a fingerprint scanner and a private elevator that required a key. Amara clutched the contract drafts her own lawyer had reviewed as the elevator climbed, her reflection staring back at her from mirrored walls. She looked different already. Sharper. More alive. The doors opened directly into his space, and Amara's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, Manhattan sprawling beneath them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. The interior was all clean lines and dark woods, Korean aesthetics meeting modern minimalism. But what stopped her was the table in the center of his dining room, set for two, with a Korean barbecue grill built into its surface. Jiho emerged from the kitchen carrying banchan, small plates of kimchi, pickled radishes, seasoned spinach. He traded his usual suit for dark slacks and a black button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Somehow, he looked more dangerous this way. More real. I thought we should negotiate over food, he said. Everything's better with food. You cook. Amara couldn't hide her surprise. I lived alone in Seoul for 15 years. I learned or I starved. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We have much to discuss. They ate first, Jiho grilling marinated beef and pork belly with practiced efficiency. He taught her the proper way to wrap the meat in lettuce with samjang and garlic. The intimacy of it, sharing food, his hands guiding hers, felt more binding than any contract. Finally, over soju poured into small glasses, they began. Separate bedrooms, Amara said, pulling out her annotated contract. At least initially. I need my own space. Agreed. The penthouse has 4 bedrooms. Choose whichever you want. Jiho made a note, but we share common areas. I won't have us living like strangers under one roof. Fair. What about your business? She met his eyes. I need to know what I'm walking into. Not every detail, but enough that I'm not blindsided. Full transparency on anything that could impact you or Baptiste Couture. He leaned back. I'll never lie to you, Amara. I'll tell you when I can't tell you something, but I won't deceive you. That's a promise. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. Public appearances, she continued. We present as a united front. No contradicting each other in front of others, even if we disagree privately. Especially in front of my brother. Jiho's smile was cold. Which brings me to my term. When we're in public, You let me be possessive. Touch you, stand close, make it clear you're mine. It needs to look real. It is real, Amara said quietly. Legally, at least. You know what I mean. His gaze intensified. I need Theodore to see that I didn't just marry someone. I married the woman his son was stupid enough to lose. I need him to understand what a colossal mistake his family made. So, I'm a weapon in your revenge. We're weapons in each other's revenge. He poured more soju. That's the partnership. We sharpen each other, not dull each other down. Amara considered this, then raised her glass. One more thing. If either of us wants out, truly out, we exit gracefully. No scorched earth between us. We've both been betrayed enough. Jiho touched his glass to hers, the crystal singing softly. If I ever want out, you'll be the first to know. His voice dropped lower. But I should warn you, Amara, I don't quit things I value. And I'm beginning to value you quite a lot. Heat flooded her cheeks. She drank to hide it. They spent the next 2 hours refining details. Financial arrangements, separate business accounts, joint household expenses, decision-making protocols, how to handle media attention, what to tell their respective circles. By the time they finished, the city lights had transformed the windows into a galaxy of possibility. Tomorrow, Jiho said, walking her to the elevator. We signed the official papers. After that, you're Mrs. Park. I'm keeping Baptiste, Amara corrected. His smile was genuine, warm, devastating. I wouldn't have it any other way. The courthouse in Lower Manhattan was deliberately unremarkable. Gray stone, fluorescent lighting, the smell of old paper and bureaucracy. Amara had chosen a cream silk suit, architectural, clean, the kind of thing her grandmother would have called power in cloth form. Jiho wore charcoal, perfectly tailored, a small white rose on his lapel that matched the bouquet he'd given her when she arrived. You remembered, she'd said, staring at the white roses mixed with bird of paradise, her favorite, though she'd only mentioned it once during their negotiations. I remember everything about you, he'd replied, and the weight of that statement followed her into the judge's chambers. There was only one witness, a woman named Yoon Min-ji, Jiho's attorney and apparently his oldest friend. She was elegant, sharp-eyed, and smiled at Amara like she knew something they didn't yet. The ceremony took 7 minutes. Judge Morrison, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, read the legal language with practiced efficiency. Amara barely heard it. She was too aware of Jiho standing beside her, his hand finding hers as they faced the judge, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent electricity up her arm. Do you, Park Jiho, take Amara Baptiste to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, certain, brooking no doubt. And do you, Amara Baptiste, take Park Jiho to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it. The point of no return. Amara looked at Jiho, really looked at him. Saw the man who'd appeared from shadows to offer her an empire. Who'd been watching her for years, collecting her designs like precious artifacts. Who'd promised honesty in a world built on lies. I do, she said, and meant it more than she'd expected. The rings? Jiho produced a box from his pocket, and when he opened it, Amara's breath stopped. The ring wasn't what she'd anticipated. Not a traditional diamond. Not something borrowed from family vaults. It was a black diamond, cushion-cut and substantial, set in platinum with smaller white diamonds flanking it.
Dark and light.
Unexpected and perfect. I had it made, he said quietly only for her. Black diamonds are formed under extreme pressure. They're technically imperfect, full of inclusions and fractures. But that's what makes them stronger than regular diamonds. Unbreakable. His eyes met hers. Like you. Amara's throat tightened as he slid it onto her finger. The weight of it felt like a promise. She produced his ring, a simple platinum band she'd chosen, elegant and understated. But when she slid it onto his finger, she noticed her hands were trembling. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss." They turned to face each other, and time slowed. Jiho's hand came up to cup her jaw, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palm. He studied her face like he was memorizing it, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, the courthouse disappeared. There was only heat and want and something terrifying that tasted like inevitability. The kiss was supposed to be perfunctory, a legal requirement. Instead, it was devastating. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and Amara's fingers curled into his lapels like she was drowning and he was solid ground. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than they should be, Minji was smiling like she'd won a bet. "Congratulations," she said, entirely too knowing. "Something tells me this arrangement is going to be very interesting." Jiho kept his hand on Amara's waist as they signed the marriage certificate, his touch possessive and sure. When they stepped out into the autumn sunlight, officially married, he leaned down to whisper in her ear. That wasn't just for show. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I know." His smile was slow, dangerous, full of promise. "Good. Neither was this." He kissed her again, right there on the courthouse steps, and Amara kissed him back like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. Living with Jiho was like learning a new language, one spoken in glances, silences, and things left deliberately unsaid. The first week, Amara noticed the patterns. Phone calls that came at 2 in the morning, Jiho answering in rapid Korean before disappearing into his office. Men in expensive suits who arrived without warning, conducted meetings behind soundproof doors, and left with briefcases that seemed heavier than when they'd arrived. Conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room, then resumed in coded references she wasn't meant to understand. "Busan shipment delayed," someone would say, and Jiho would nod, but Amara was learning that Busan might mean Tokyo, and delayed might mean intercepted by customs or rerouted through channels that didn't appear on official manifests.
She didn't ask.
That was part of their agreement. He'd tell her what she needed to know. What surprised her was how much he chose to tell her anyway. "The gallery opening tonight," he said one morning over coffee, both of them reading on opposite ends of the living room couch, a comfortable silence between them. "3 of my associates will be there. Korean men, late 50s, they'll try to speak to me privately. Don't be offended when I step away." "Business?" she asked, not looking up from her sketches. "Always." He paused. "They're negotiating a textile contract in Como. The one I promised you access to." Her head snapped up. He was watching her with that intense focus that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "You're still working on that?" "I don't make promises I don't keep, Amara." He returned to his tablet. "The contract will be finalized next month. I thought you'd want to visit the mills yourself, choose your fabrics directly." She'd gone back to sketching, but something warm had unfurled in her chest. The second week, she'd been looking for Jiho to ask about dinner plans and found a door she'd never seen open, his private office, the one room he'd said was off-limits unless invited. The door was ajar. Not open, but not locked. An invitation, maybe. Or a test. Amara pushed it open. The office was smaller than she'd expected, darker, with only one window. The walls were covered in frames, and when she stepped closer, her heart stopped. They were her designs. Every major piece from the past 2 years, sketches, photographs, even fabric swatches. Arranged chronologically, catalogued like museum pieces. In the center, Above his desk hung a portrait she'd never seen before. Oil on canvas, clearly expensive, unmistakably her. She was mid-laugh, wearing one of her own designs, captured in a moment she didn't remember but recognized as true. I commissioned it after the MoMA gala. Jiho's voice came from behind her. You were talking to a curator about Caribbean textile traditions, and you lit up in a way I'd never seen you do around Pedro. I wanted to remember that version of you. Amara turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, unreadable. You've been collecting my work. I've been collecting you. He stepped inside. Your talent, your vision, the things you create when you think no one's watching. He moved to stand beside her, both of them looking at the portrait. This is who you are, Amara. Not the diminished version you showed the Kenners. This. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to discover it yourself. To see that someone's been paying attention all along. He turned to face her. You're not invisible. You've never been invisible. Not to me. Something cracked open inside her chest, and before she could stop herself, Amara reached for him. Her hands cupped his face, and she kissed him with everything she'd been holding back, gratitude and desire, and the terrifying feeling that this arrangement had stopped being an arrangement somewhere between the courthouse and this moment. Jiho responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I see you, he whispered. Every brilliant, terrifying piece of you. And I'm not afraid. Amara's voice was barely audible. I'm starting to see you too. Good, Jiho said, his smile dangerous and warm. That's exactly what I wanted. The fabric arrived on a Tuesday morning in unmarked crates, silk from Como that shimmered like liquid obsidian, wool from a Scottish mill that had a 3-year waiting list, linen from Belgium so fine it felt like breathing. Jiho's contacts, now hers. His empire, now theirs. Amara stood in her new studio, the entire 10th floor of the building Jiho had given her, Baptiste Couture's name already gleaming on the door, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the small, careful freedom she'd carved out with Pedro, but the wild, unlimited kind that came from someone saying create anything and meaning it. She spent 3 weeks designing in a fever dream of inspiration. Her new collection was everything she'd suppressed. Bold prints that screamed rather than whispered, silhouettes that challenged rather than pleased, colors that demanded attention rather than blending in. This was the work her grandmother had always known she was capable of. This was who she'd been before she started apologizing for taking up space. But there was one piece she kept separate from the collection. One design she worked on late at night in the penthouse, after Jiho had finished his calls and disappeared into his office. A suit.
For him.
She'd been studying him for weeks now. The way he moved, the precision of his gestures, the lethal grace he carried like a second skin. She'd noticed how his suits, though perfectly tailored, were always conservative. Safe. The armor of a man who'd learned to hide in plain sight. She wanted to give him permission to be seen. The fabric was a deep charcoal with the subtlest thread of crimson running through it, visible only when light hit it at certain angles. The cut was sharp, almost aggressive, with a mandarin collar that honored his heritage and lines that emphasized his shoulders and the dangerous confidence in his stance. She'd embroidered a small phoenix inside the jacket lining, hidden where only he would know it existed. Rising from ashes. Transformation. Rebirth. When she finally finished, she found him in his office at midnight, reviewing contracts. I made you something, she said from the doorway. He looked up, and something in her expression made him set down his pen immediately. She brought the suit in on a hanger and watched his face as he registered what he was seeing.
For a long moment he said nothing.
Then he stood, crossed to her, and took the hanger with hands that were almost reverent. Amara. Her name was barely a whisper.
Try it on, she said.
I need to see if the fit is right. He disappeared into the adjacent bathroom, and when he emerged, Amara's breath caught. The suit transformed him. Not into something he wasn't, but into exactly what he was: powerful, dangerous, unapologetic. The crimson threads caught the light like controlled fire. He looked like a king who'd stopped pretending to be anything less. How do I look? He asked, but his eyes said he already knew. Like yourself, she answered. Finally, Ji-ho moved toward her with that predatory grace, and this time there was no hesitation, no pretense of this being strategy or arrangement. When he reached her, his hands framed her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. Do you know what you've done? His voice was rough, raw. You've given me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Permission to be seen, Amara whispered, understanding perfectly because he'd given her the same thing. I don't want revenge anymore, he said, his forehead touching hers. I want this.
You. Us.
Building something that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with who we become together. Amara's hands smoothed over the suit she'd made, feeling his heartbeat through the fabric. I stopped wanting revenge 3 weeks ago. I started wanting you instead. Then we agree. His smile was devastating. This stopped being an arrangement the moment you said, I do. Maybe even before that, she admitted. Maybe the moment you appeared in that garden and saw me. Really saw me. Ji-ho kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes held something that looked dangerously like forever. Come to bed with me, he said. Not a command. An invitation. A choice. Amara took his hand, laced her fingers through his, and chose him. Chose them. Chose the future they'd build from the ashes of who they'd been forced to be. Yes, she said, and meant it with everything she was. This time, when she walked into the darkness, she wasn't running from anything. She was running toward everything.